Welcome to #CNF, a conversation about reading and writing with authors in the genre of creative nonfiction. I'm Brendan O'Mara. Tom McAllister is the author of Bury Me in My Jersey, a memoir of my father, football, and Philly. He's also the co-host of the wildly entertaining Book Fight podcast and a professor at Temple University. Most recently, he's the editor of Bring the Noise, a collection of the best pop culture essays from Barrelhouse Magazine. Bring the Noise, to sum up McAllister's hilarious introduction, is a treatise on the stupid things we love. Yes, there's the stupid things we love, but Bring the Noise shows how beautiful these stupid things are when in the hands of 17 artful storytellers, whose personal stories elevate popular culture to the adult table. In it you'll find professional wrestling, roller derby, Barry Bonds, and the never-ending reality of the hills, and, in true Barrelhouse style, the Patrick Swayze question. It is my great pleasure to welcome Tom McAllister to #CNF. Tom, thanks for coming aboard.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
So what brought you to want to make your first book through Barrelhouse a book about your best pop culture essays?
I think the main thing is that for a long time, kind of our defining characteristic for a lot of people is our pop culture thing. And all of our essays and every issue we've ever published is, every essay is pop culture related in some way. And so we thought if we're launching a book line, we should do something very Barrelhousey. We had a few other kind of book pitches and some other ideas that we thought about starting with, but we thought it would be good to start with something that's very, I guess to sound like a business student, very kind of on brand, you know? And so, plus we just love a lot of those essays, and we were excited to have a chance to bring them back out, because some of them, like, you know, none of us even has a copy of issue 1 as far as I know. And so it was nice, you know, we all love the essay from that one. That's the Magnum PI one by Steve Kishtelins. And so we thought it'd be great to kind of give those things a new life. And as it turns out, it's been a really useful tool at things like AWP. When people ask, you know, what's your aesthetic, what are you into, we can say, well, here it is, here's our favorite things we've ever published. And so we think it's a good representation of what we've done for the past almost decade.
How and why did these essays make the cut?
First, we wanted to pick one from every issue. That ended up not quite happening, because there was a couple issues where we wanted, I think it was our 5th issue, the dive bar issue, we wanted at least 2 from there, because we all tend to agree that's our best nonfiction issue. But we had a vote for the inclusions from the first 10. Every one of us just nominated the ones we loved. For most of them, it was easy. There was a clear-cut winner in some of them, like the Barry Bonds one you mentioned has already been anthologized in the Best American Non-Required Reading, and I think somewhere else. And so we knew that was going to be in there. And even though it was kind of a very timely essay when it was published in, I think, 05 or 06, I think a lot of that stuff still resonates, as if you just replace Barry Bonds' name with Lance Armstrong or something. A lot of the same stuff that gets discussed is there. Then I kind of had free reign for anything that was new. The other guys had the opportunity to chime in if they wanted, but the way Barrelhouse works, I've quickly learned, is that you send an email out, invite people to join in, and if they don't, you just go ahead and do it and let them catch up later. So all the new stuff was picked by me, and I guess what I look for to better answer your question is I can read a lot of essays when I'm reading submissions, and a lot of them are technically sound and interesting enough, but there's no sense of urgency. It doesn't feel like there's anything on the line for the writer. Like, it just seems almost like a creative writing exercise that they did really well. And what I really liked about the new ones, there's Leslie Jill Patterson's one. It's kind of a lyric essay that mashes up some stuff. I shouldn't say mashes up, that's a whole different thing. That mixes up discussion of real life domestic abuse issues with the way popular culture represents those things, and I thought, and it also mixes up some clearly personal stuff of her time working in a shelter for abused women, or her time living in one, and I thought it was really great. If it seemed like there was some stuff on the line there for the writer, where you know, she was pouring something into it beyond just, you know, time. There was an emotional kind of appeal to it, which I guess is what I like a lot about it. the wrestling one is in there. I think it has a lot of those same appeals. But also, as soon as I took over as nonfiction editor, I made it my mission to find someone to write me a good wrestling essay.
Yeah.
So I was pushing for a really long time to make issue 12 our wrestling issue, but that didn't take.
Mm-hmm.
But
Barrelhouse Mania or something.
Yeah, it would be great. But then I met Todd Kaneko, who wrote that essay at AWP, I think, and he was reading poems about dead wrestlers. And I charged him as soon as he finished, and I said, "You have to be in the Barrelhouse business. This is too perfect a fit."
And what is it you think about pop culture? What about pop culture that says so much about us?
I think this is a sentiment shared by all of us. And the thing, part of it is that part of our embrace of the pop culture thing is that we are turned off by the portion of literary culture that is too cool for pop culture. Mm-hmm. I think one of our founders, Dave Housey, in an interview recently said something like, we wanted to be the people, if we were at a party, we wanted to talk to the people who were talking about what was great on TV last night, not the people saying we don't own TVs. Yeah. And so there's that. It's kind of an acknowledgement of what's going on around us. And I think also the truth is that as much as we would love it if we were all shaped by the classics, and to an extent we kind of are, most of us, a lot of our formative experiences are built around these really stupid things. I remember I was going to put this in the little intro, and it turned out it's not a true thing. Until like a couple months ago, I was under the impression that during the Transformers movie, the cartoon from the 80s, mm-hmm. With Orson Welles as the narrator, I was under the impression that Bumblebee, this little car, had died because my brother told me that. And I remember it being inconsolable for days. I was crying. I was upset that Bumblebee was dead. As it turns out, he didn't die, and my brother is just a liar. But those sorts of things shouldn't affect us the way they do, and yet they do. And I think they inform the way we treat each other. I deal with college freshmen, and most of the way they interpret the world is based on things that they've learned from movies and music and TV and stuff. So I think it's an honest way of dealing with the world.
Yeah, and I recently read a piece on Grantland.com about Super Mario Brothers. It's the 20th anniversary of that god-awful movie that they
movie when I was in school.
Yeah, and
Bob Hoskins.
Yeah. And John Leguizamo and Dennis Hopper as Bowser or whatever. Yeah. But as I was reading the essay, and the woman who wrote it was still, she put in some YouTubes about the classic Super Mario Brothers, and just in reading about that, I was 7 years old sitting cross-legged in front of my TV, clicking away trying to beat all these 8 freaky, trippy world, and throwing my controller up against the wall and chipping the hard wall. So there's this chipping the drywall, and there's this nostalgic quality that a popular culture thing can bring to the forefront. And maybe you can talk to that as well, of how it brings you back to a time, and once you get removed from it, you can see it through a completely different lens.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about a couple of the essays that we have in there, like the Magnum PI one that we all like. Mm-hmm. Steve is reflecting on how he and his dad used to watch Magnum PI, and he's realizing now, 40 years later, or 30 years later, whenever he wrote it, or whatever age he was when he wrote it, that it meant a whole different thing to him. And I think that's, in reading nonfiction, that's one of the things that most interests me is this disconnect between the way different people view the same exact things. And that's a lot of what I have my students work on, is trying to have them do exercises or read short pieces where it's, you could have four people in the same room seeing the same exact thing and interpret have very different interpretations. And, it's the same thing like you just said. Over time, your interpretation changes. The person I was when I was 12 is very different than I am now, and I hope. And, that I think that's a valuable exercise, and it also invites the reader to reflect. Even if the reader doesn't have some personal memories of Magnum PI, it invites them to reflect on their own kind of pop culture obsession from when they were 10, or the thing they shared with their father or their mother or whoever.
Mm-hmm. In pop culture writing, I feel it balances on this thread. Like, it can be great, but it doesn't take much for it to just fall off and devolve. Like, what do you think are the challenges in writing well about pop culture?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think you mentioned the Grantland, and that site is, I think, a perfect illustration of the dichotomy. I have a hard time with that site because some of the stuff on there is amazing writing, and they just give these writers free reign to just write as much as they want about this thing they're obsessed with, which turns out great. And then sometimes it's like the most insipid, shallow things. I don't understand some of the headlines that are like fantasy drafts for people on reality fashion shows. I don't even know what that means. And so I think there's always a risk, and I see this in submissions too, of people kind of going for the cheap joke sometimes, or not never going beyond just pointing out interesting things about the culture. Even if sometimes people will send us things that almost look like they were drawn from a thesis, and sometimes probably were drawn from like a doctoral thesis, that are really good deconstructions of the matriarchal values and All in the Family or something, but they're not interesting to read. Mm-hmm. And even more than that, I think what they neglect when it comes to creative nonfiction or literary nonfiction or whatever term people use, I think anything that I feel described as literary usually has some human relationships at the heart of it. Mm-hmm. And so the pop culture is used as a way to talk about something else. Like in the Bring the Noise, one of my favorites, it's the first one I ever accepted as the Barrelhouse nonfiction editor, was Sarah Sweeney's one about stalking Adrian Grenier before he became famous. Yep. And that's really all about, there's some stuff about Adrian Grenier and 17 magazine and whatever, but it's really all about her dissolving friendship with her best friend, who turns out to be kind of a crazy person. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of thing I like. I like it as an entry point, but not as kind of the end point. And,
what has being kind of changing gears just a little bit, what has being a teacher of creative writing done to help your approach to the craft of writing?
It has made me a lot harsher on my writing, because I can see even the best undergrad, even the most dedicated undergrad, is going to often write some stuff that is just not interesting. Mm-hmm. And it forces me to think about, it's very easy, especially if you're an undergrad, a lot of them haven't done a ton of writing, so it's the first stories they've written and they're just excited, they're kind of intoxicated by the thought of telling stories. And even though people don't read books, there's still this cultural capital to being a writer. They just tell stories that nobody's ever going to care about. And so then I have to force myself to read my own writing the same way, I think, with that same kind of harsh, detached eye, as if I'm grading it, basically. The other thing it's made me think about more is different forms, because the students, often one of the benefits of them being total novices is that they just do wildly bizarre things sometimes that don't work, usually. Mm-hmm. But the bizarre things are totally worthwhile experiments, because they're just they're just saying, like, figuring out what this thing is, Yeah. And so it's allowed me as a writer the free. It's the thing every writer says, like, you should be willing to write bad work and you'd be ready to fail and stuff. But I have a hard time actually practicing that, because I stress myself out over this thing and it needs to be perfect. And it's actually freed me up a little bit to just do some daily writing that is not any good, with the intent of it eventually being someday good, but to feel more comfortable with failure. Mm-hmm. I think seeing the students' consistent failure to write publishable work, which is not a criticism of them, to see it in that consistent failure helps me to accept my own.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch upon, too, the epigraph to your memoir, the Kurt Vonnegut quote, and I'll just read it here. It says, I feel and think much as you do, care about many of the things you care about, although most people don't care about them. You are not alone. And I wanted to ask you what the inspiration for that quote was.
Okay, two inspirations. One is, I guess this doesn't make me that unique. Like many high school and college age guys, I was obsessed with Vonnegut. Mm-hmm. I read Slaughterhouse-Five, and I feel like it actually changed my brain. It changed the way I did everything, for better and worse. And so his writing has always been a major influence. And so I thought, especially in a memoir in which a lot of the stuff I talk about is my kind of journey as a writer, I thought it would make sense to have him be there, but also thematically with that book, it's all about my obsession with the Eagles. That's for listeners. That's the NFL's Eagles, not the band. It's all about Joe Walsh, and it was all about my obsession with this football team and the way I kept trying to create new communities for myself. I didn't realize till later when I was writing it that I'd spent a long time. I was able, when I was trying to organize the thing, to realize that a lot of the chapters broke down into me setting up a community I tried to join and either failed to join it or kind of ingratiated myself. And so I realized that a lot of my story was just one of trying to find a place where it felt okay to be interested in the things I was interested in, and with varying degrees of success. And so I thought that was that line, I think, kind of summed that up really well. And I think that's at the heart of a lot of Vonnegut's writing. A lot of his stuff is about, I forget which book it is now, maybe Slapstick, where he talks about there's this kind of running gag of people saying they're from the Hoosier State and they kind of become friends just because they're from Indiana. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the one where they want everyone to wear name tags and everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, so that constant that need to reach out and just have someone say you're not crazy to think the things that you think. Mm-hmm. I think is at the heart of that book, and I think is a really pretty powerful universal message. Actually,
you speak of your evolution as a writer and teacher, and I can also kind of, as you're looking to evolve Barrelhouse further, going into this more or less book division too. I see the reflection of McSweeney's, which has been Dave Eggers' imprint for a while now. Have you drawn any inspiration or I guess just inspiration from what they're doing and how they're approaching book publishing and book design?
Yeah, oh God, we would love to be as successful as McSweeney's, that's for sure. We talked last time we had. We all live in different places now, mostly, except for Mike, my book fight co-host. Mm-hmm. He lives around here, but we have what we call corporate retreats, once every 6 months, and we get together and we kind of solve all our issues and drink a lot of beer. And mm-hmm. One of the things we talked about there was, as it turns out, we were all talking about nobody makes money selling literary journals. We just do it and we make money to support the journal. And as it turns out, McSweeney's actually does make most of their money from the journals, which surprised. I actually thought that nobody actually made money off of them.
Yeah.
And especially with how much money they must spend on the design, which is amazing. We've talked a lot about, after that, we talked a lot about design, especially because, we were really happy with the people who did the work on design for us, but in the past we've kind of punted on it because none of us has any real sense of how to do good design work, and we've had volunteers do it, and we've now are fortunately financially stable enough that we paid a designer for the book. We wanted to launch the book to be as good as possible, and I love the cover of that book.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, she did a great job. Anastasia Miller, I think is her last name. I should know. And we're paying someone to design the next couple of issues of Barrelhouse too, because we do want to step up the design game. We felt like there was a point in the beginning where we were ahead of the curve on design, and then we kind of plateaued, and everyone passed us. And so we're trying to catch up because there are so many journals, right? And I don't even know what most of them are, and I don't know how to decide what to read. And so one area where you can make yourself stand out a little bit is with more inviting design. So we've definitely taken some inspiration from McSweeney's and Tin House and those other types on that level.
Yeah, it goes to just even walking through a bookstore, AWP, seeing all those literary journals, all these authors, and everyone's, as hard as it is to publish books, there's so many books out there, and it's how do you stand out? And I guess it ultimately boils down to having great content, but even then you still have to get people to notice that you have good content.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I just did. I have an interview. Treatise Magazine interviewed me about some stuff about the book, and they asked basically that question. They said, there are so many journals, why should we read you? And I had a really hard time answering that question because I wanted to say, well, because the writing's really good. Mm-hmm. But that's not really much of a sales pitch. I don't know that I gave actually an adequate answer to them. essentially, what I think one of my things was that we pay writers now, so you're supporting writers and us. But it's a hard thing to say because we're really proud of the work, but then you were at AWP, you saw the tables,
Yeah.
How do you pick one of 700 tables to spend your money at? And that's my experience working the table there is most of the sales either happen with people who come in the beginning of the day and don't realize they should budget and just blow their money at their first couple tables,
Right.
or people who wait till the last day and run around looking for deals. And then there's this huge dead space in between where just a bunch of literary zombies wander around.
Right. Yeah, well, and I can't let you get out of here without asking you what your favorite Patrick Swayze movie is.
I'm kind of a pariah with the Barrelhouse guys in that I don't love Patrick Swayze like they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I always default to Dave Housley, I think, in a very unironic way, just loves Patrick Swayze. I think I always default to Roadhouse primarily because it's such a lunatic premise of this famous. I think Chuck Klosterman has a great essay about it, right? But this idea of this famous bouncer,
Yeah.
The whole thing is crazy and very entertaining. Although, if I had to say one that I actually really enjoyed growing up, it wouldn't be a movie. It would be the famous Swayze Farley Chippendales thing on Saturday Night Live.
All right.
That would be the one that was probably my first non-ghost experience of Patrick Swayze.
Well, Tom McAllister is the nonfiction editor at Barrelhouse Magazine and editor of Bring the Noise, the best pop culture essays from Barrelhouse Magazine. It is published by Barrelhouse Books. Tom, thank you so much for carving out some time this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.